I had been cleaning the office, just like I had done countless times before. The marble floors gleamed under my mop, the rhythm of my movement steady after all those years of practice. Even at 40, with an aching back that sometimes made me wince, I moved with purpose. It was like my mop had become a part of me, an extension of my arm. I always made sure to offer a kind smile to those who passed by, despite the worry lines etched deep into my face from years of challenges. That day, as I was finishing up the last corner of the office, I heard heavy footsteps echo down the hallway. Those footsteps belonged to Mr. William, my boss. I had come to recognize that sound all too well, and it rarely brought good news. As the sound drew closer, I braced myself, placing a hand on my lower back, hoping to relieve a bit of the pain, and turned to face him. "Danielle, we need to talk," he said, his voice colder than usual. No warmth, no hesitation, just a command. He didn't wait for my response, didn't give me a chance to gather myself. Instead, he turned on his heel, hands clasped behind his back, and marched back toward his office. I could feel the stares from everyone in the office. My face flushed with embarrassment as I tried to calm the rising tide of anxiety swelling inside me. What could he want from me? My heart pounded faster with every step I took toward his office. I followed, my legs feeling heavier with each step. When I entered his office, he was already seated behind that large mahogany desk, his expression blank. "Sit," he said, pointing to the chair in front of him. I sat, my mind racing to figure out why I was here. "Mr. William, is something wrong?" I could barely get the words out, my voice shaking with uncertainty. "I'll get straight to the point, Danielle. We can no longer keep you on as an employee," he said, without a trace of hesitation or sympathy. It hit me like a punch to the gut. What? Why? I had always done everything asked of me. Always on time, never missed a day. I stammered, "But Mr. William, I've always done everything you asked. I've never been late, never missed a day." He didn't soften. In fact, his next words cut even deeper. "In reality, you've been an extremely incompetent employee. You spent more time daydreaming than working. This company is for the capable, and you are not." He turned his attention back to the papers on his desk, dismissing me without even looking up. "Pack your things and leave the building immediately." I stood up, my legs trembling, tears already forming in my eyes. "I understand, Mr. William." "I'm sorry," I muttered, my voice thick with emotion as I walked out of his office. His words echoed in my mind with every step I took, each one feeling heavier than the last. I tried to hold it together as I packed up my locker, but the tears came freely, no longer held back by pride. How was I going to pay the bills? How was I going to manage the debt? And my son's school fees? I whispered these questions to myself, my voice shaky as I tried to imagine a future without this job. The weight of uncertainty and fear pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. The routine, the small moments of joy that this job had provided, they were gone now. Replaced by a hollow ache of loss. I carefully packed my belongings into a cardboard box, each item a small piece of the life I built there. But as I held that box close to my chest, it felt like I was carrying all my fears and uncertainties on my shoulders. I could feel the eyes of the entire office on me, watching every step I took. Then, just as I was about to leave, William stormed out of his office. His eyes locked on me, and I saw nothing but anger. "You're worthless and useless. Get out of here right now," he shouted, his words cutting through me like a knife. He didn't care that everyone was watching, that his cruel words were searing into my heart. "Get out of my company," he ordered again, dismissing me like I was nothing. I felt the hot sting of tears welling up, but I kept my head down. I didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. I clutched that box even tighter, like it could somehow protect me from the flood of emotions rising inside me. William's words echoed in my mind as I crossed the lobby, every step reminding me of the humiliation I had just endured. By the time I got home, I was emotionally drained, but then I saw something taped to my front door. With shaking hands, I reached out and pulled the paper free. My heart sank as I read it. It was an eviction notice. 2 months behind on rent. That was when the dam broke, and all the tears I'd been holding back came rushing out. How am I supposed to fix this? I whispered to myself, the weight of it all crashing down. I had barely been making ends meet as it was. The paycheck I'd just lost had been covering my son, Alexander's, medical bills. His health had been getting worse over the last few months due to his chronic illness. His doctor visits, the medications, they were all adding up. But now, with no job and the threat of losing our home, I felt utterly helpless. The house felt darker that evening, as if the walls were closing in on me. Every corner seemed to remind me of the struggles I couldn't escape. I set the box down on the table and collapsed into a chair, trying to collect my thoughts. But all I could think was, what do I do now? Alexander's condition wasn't helping. He had another seizure recently, and the doctors warned that the treatments would become more frequent and expensive. I had always managed to juggle the finances somehow, making sure he never lacked for anything. But now, the reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave. That night, I made dinner for him, but before long, he started complaining about the pain. I gave him his medicine, like the doctors had told me, but then it struck me, this was the last pill in the bottle. I stared at the empty box in disbelief. I have to figure something out, I thought, my mind racing. Alexander finally drifted off to sleep, the medicine working its temporary magic. I watched him, my heart heavy with fear. God, how am I going to pay for his medicine? I prayed silently. Please, show me a way out of this. Sleep felt like a distant dream. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the worries swirling in my head like a storm I couldn't escape. There was no room in my mind for anything else. Finally, I decided to check my bank account online. It was my last, desperate move, even though I already knew the answer. There wasn't going to be anything left. My heart was pounding as I logged into my bank account. I braced myself for what I feared, a negative balance, barely above zero. But when the screen loaded, I blinked in disbelief. The number staring back at me was, impossible. This can't be real, I whispered, afraid to say it too loud, as if the sound of my own voice might make the numbers vanish. There, right in front of me, my account balance showed an amount I could never have imagined. I sat there, staring at the screen, the soft blue glow reflecting off my tired face, highlighting the tears still clinging to my cheeks. This has to be a mistake, I muttered to myself. I refreshed the page, my fingers trembling, expecting it to correct itself. But no. The number stayed the same. An unexplainable, enormous sum had been deposited into my account. I stood up, feeling a rush of emotions, hope, fear, and disbelief, all swirling together. Could this be it? Could this be the answer to everything? With that money, I could pay for Alexander's treatment, cover the rent, fix everything. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel a tiny sliver of relief. But it didn't last. The uncertainty weighed heavy on my chest. Where did this come from? What if it's a mistake, and they ask for it back? Just as that thought crossed my mind, a soft, pained moan echoed from Alexander's room. I rushed to his side. There he was, curled up in his bed, clutching his stomach. "Mommy, it hurts so much," he whimpered, his small hands pressing against his belly. "I'm taking you to the hospital, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. I grabbed my jacket, throwing it over my pajamas, and helped him sit up. He felt so light in my arms, too light for a boy his age. The drive to the hospital was quiet, broken only by Alexander's shallow breaths. I kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other clutching his tiny hand. "Hold on, baby. We're almost there," I whispered, every word accompanied by a silent prayer. When we finally arrived, I scooped him up and hurried into the ER. "Please, my son needs help," I begged the first nurse I saw, my voice shaking. She didn't hesitate, sensing the urgency, and immediately called for a doctor. As they took Alexander back for an examination, I was left in the hallway, waiting. I paced back and forth, my mind a tangled mess of uncertainty. The source of the money in my account weighed heavily on me, but my fear for Alexander's health loomed even larger. What if I used that money to pay for the hospital and then have to give it back? What would I do? The indecision paralyzed me, my thoughts spiraling out of control. Soon, the doctor appeared, his serious expression confirming what I dreaded. "His condition is severe. He needs to be admitted immediately," he said, his voice calm but firm. He explained that they would need to run tests and that surgery might be necessary. "There's a blockage in his intestines that we must address. Treating your son's chronic condition won't be cheap, but without the proper care, I'm afraid his life is at risk." I could barely breathe. "But doctor, how am I supposed to? How can I possibly pay for all this?" My fear of losing Alexander overtook the worry about the mysterious money. I knew I should report it to the police, but in that moment, nothing mattered more than saving my boy's life. I'd figure out how to return the money later. "I'll take care of him," the doctor continued. "If you're able to pay, we can move forward with everything right away. I just need your consent to begin the procedures." He handed me the paperwork, and with trembling hands, I took the pen and signed. I made up my mind then. I would use the money. This was my chance to save Alexander. This money, whatever its origin, was going to give my son a fighting chance. I had to believe that. As each word formed in my mind, I felt a cautious determination settling in. After signing the papers, I sat by Alexander's bed, holding his hand as he drifted off to sleep under the effects of the medication. "I'll figure this out," I promised him in the quiet of the hospital room. "But first, I'm going to make sure you get better." In the days that followed, I stayed by his bedside, watching for every small sign of improvement, clinging to each fragile smile he managed to give. I used the money to pay off immediate debts, securing his ongoing treatment, even though the mystery of where it came from still gnawed at me. "It's going to be okay, Alexander," I whispered over and over, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to comfort him or convince myself. When he was finally cleared to leave the hospital, the relief washed over me like a wave. But the doctor's warning stayed with me. "He's doing better now," he said, "but you must continue his treatment. We can't risk any interruptions, or there's a chance he'll end up right back here." I nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation, and helped Alexander into the wheelchair. When we returned from the hospital, as we were walking along the sidewalk, I noticed my neighbor, Monica, collapsed at her front door. Without hesitation, I called an ambulance and rushed to help her. Soon after, her husband arrived, and his face fell when he saw her. He told me they didn't have the money to cover the medical expenses. In that moment, I made a decision. I used some of the money I had to offer him a kind gift, hoping it might help in some small way. But, of course, nothing goes unnoticed in a neighborhood like ours. At first, some people seemed to admire my gesture, but it didn't take long for the whispers to start. Not everyone looked kindly upon what I had done. Jealousy, suspicion, they began to spread, like a wildfire, through the narrow streets of our close-knit community. How does someone like her, just a cleaning lady, suddenly have so much money? Something's not right. I heard she paid for her son's treatment and her neighbor's hospital bills. The gossip circled around me like a dark cloud. I knew I had to find a way to bring order to the chaos that had become my life. Before dawn broke, while the house was still wrapped in the soft shadows of early morning, I was already awake. Determined to uncover the truth about that money, I powered on the computer, my heart racing as I prepared to check the account balance and print the statements. "Let's see what's really going on here," I muttered under my breath, my fingers trembling as I typed in the password. When the screen finally loaded, my heart nearly stopped. The balance had dropped drastically. But how? I scrolled through the details, desperate to find an explanation for this mysterious disappearance. "This can't be happening," I whispered, almost as if speaking to myself. Each transaction on the list was foreign to me, not a single one made by my hand. My breathing grew heavier, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me until it felt unbearable. If the money's gone, how will I pay for Alexander's treatments? The fear gripped me like a vice. Without that money, I had no way to cover the costs. There wasn't a job in the world that paid enough for something like this. I realized I needed a plan, a way to investigate without drawing too much attention to myself or involving the bank unnecessarily. So, I went over each bank transaction again, this time with painstaking care, noting down every strange detail. Dates, times, amounts, each one meticulously recorded in what was quickly becoming a diary of my investigation. I was keeping a close eye on Alexander's health and the mounting medical bills, making sure his treatment wouldn't be interrupted. In between all that, I started searching online, hoping to find someone else who might have noticed changes in their bank balance, just like I had. And then, one message caught my attention. A woman wrote, "Recently, something strange happened to my account." A large sum of money appeared, but soon after, outrageous charges started coming in. I lost all the money I had, even the funds I received just before those mysterious transactions. She didn't know whether to return the money or call the police. Reading that, I couldn't help but think of Alexander, sleeping peacefully, his health slowly improving. It reminded me that I would do anything for him. "For you, my son. I'll see this through, no matter what," I whispered as I closed the laptop, preparing myself for whatever was coming next. A few weeks ago, I was an honest woman. I had a simple job, never once needing to resort to anything illegal. But the desperation of watching my child suffer, it drove me to take extreme measures just to secure his life. Even though Alexander was getting better, he still looked so small and fragile, far too vulnerable to face such serious health issues. I couldn't even imagine life without him. I knew I would do whatever it took to get him through this, no matter the cost. But the next day, I noticed another large sum of money had been withdrawn from my account. I barely had enough left to cover Alexander's next doctor's appointment. I knew I had to figure this out, so I grabbed my laptop and began my investigation. To my shock and absolute horror, I managed to trace those mysterious transactions. The source was unexpected, but unmistakable. It was David, the branch manager at my bank. "This can't be happening," I muttered, double-checking the data, hoping I had made a mistake. But the evidence was clear. The transactions led directly to David's personal account. And not just his, there were connections to several offshore accounts linked to him. I knew what I had to do. I had to report him. But the fear of not being able to pay for Alexander's treatment shook me to my core. If only I had a little more money, I thought. Then doubt crept in. What if Alexander's condition gets worse and I can't afford to keep up with his treatments? I kept asking myself, over and over again. Finally, I made the heart-wrenching decision no mother should ever have to face. I am an honest person, and I need to stay that way. I'll find another way to save my son, I told myself. But then, I looked over at Alexander, quietly playing, his health slowly coming back. I realized that I couldn't ignore what I had uncovered. You need to be a good example to Alexander, I whispered to myself. With a newfound resolve, I stood up, knowing what I had to do. Before going to the police, I decided I needed to confront David at the bank. I arrived early. My hands were cold, and my nerves were on edge, but with each step toward the branch manager's office, my determination grew stronger. By the time I reached his office, I was unsettled, but I knew I had to do it. As soon as I stepped into his office, I didn't waste a moment. Mr. David, my name is Danielle, and I've been a customer of this bank for years. We need to talk, I said, gently closing the door behind me. His expression was calm, but I saw a flicker of caution in his eyes. Danielle, what brings you here today? He asked. His voice was steady, though I could tell my presence caught him off guard. He fidgeted, and I noticed him drop a few things since I arrived. Stop pretending, David. I know about the transactions. I know you used my account to hide dirty money. How could you? I asked, my voice firm despite the trembling I felt inside. His face changed. For a brief moment, the polite mask he wore slipped, but he quickly composed himself. Danielle, you seem to have the wrong information. That's a serious accusation. If I were you, I'd choose my words carefully, he said, his tone a little colder now. I have the evidence. Don't think you'll get away with this. I won't let it slide, I said, despite the fear gripping me tighter. I felt a surge of anger rising inside me as I tried to hold my ground. You don't seem to realize who you're dealing with, Danielle, David said, his voice low and threatening. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move. Just a few days ago, there was a very suspicious transaction in your account. You didn't report it to the police. If this gets out, you won't be the only one who suffers. I can block your account at any time, but that means everything you own will be blocked. And you may very well end up in jail, he continued, each word laced with menace. I was trembling inside, but my mind was racing. I had to say something, to try to make him understand. Please, my son is sick. I'm the only one who can take care of him, I begged, tears welling up in my eyes, terrified he would carry out his threat. I could hardly bear the thought of losing Alexander. He wouldn't survive without me. David wasn't moved by my plea. He simply shrugged and said, then, Danielle, I'd advise you to keep your mouth shut and stay away from the police. Otherwise, you'll be arrested, and your son will be left without a mother. Or worse, maybe you'll be the one to lose him. There was a mocking tone to his words, and I realized he didn't care at all about my suffering or my fear as a mother. I didn't waste any more time. I rushed out of the room, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I knew I was in over my head, caught up in something dangerous, something I couldn't escape from. But I also knew I couldn't turn back now. As I hurried out of the bank, I noticed a car following me. It wasn't the first time I'd seen that license plate today. My chest tightened with panic as I picked up my pace, weaving through the crowded streets, hoping to lose whoever was tailing me. What have I gotten myself into? I whispered, fear gnawing at me. I was worried, not just for my own safety, but for Alexander's as well. I did everything I could to shake the car, but deep down, I knew I couldn't run forever. If I went to the police, they'd know. But before I could reach the station, my phone rang. It was Cindy, my neighbor. Danielle, Alexander isn't doing well. You need to come home, she said, her voice filled with worry. I hung up, my heart sinking. There was nothing more important than getting back to my son, as quickly as I could. The fear that something terrible was about to happen weighed heavily on my heart. Hold on, Alexander. I'm coming, I whispered to myself as I rushed home. When I arrived, my worst fears were almost realized. I saw Alexander, barely conscious, cradled in Cindy's arms. I gave him the medicine, but it's not helping, she explained, worry etched on her face. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to him, doing what I could to stabilize him. I quickly asked Cindy to call an ambulance. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. I had never seen Alexander's breathing so weak. Panic clawed at my chest, knowing the money I had left in my account wouldn't be nearly enough to cover the hospital bills. When we arrived, the hospital was packed with people, the noise of chaos everywhere. But I barely noticed. My entire focus was on Alexander, who seemed to be getting worse with each passing minute. I sat next to his bed in the emergency room, holding his small, cold hand, whispering words of comfort I wasn't sure even I believed. The fear inside me was overwhelming. The doctor approached with a grave expression. We're doing everything we can, but the necessary treatment is quite expensive. The sooner we start, the better his chances, he said, his voice heavy with responsibility. I'll find the money. Please, just start the treatment, I pleaded, my voice shaking with desperation. The doctor nodded sympathetically and left to prepare the medication. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, logging into the bank app, clinging to the hope that I could somehow transfer the funds. But when I tried to log in, an error message flashed on the screen. For security reasons, access to your account has been temporarily blocked. No, not now, I muttered, trying again and again, but it wouldn't go through. A wave of panic washed over me. How was I going to pay for Alexander's treatment without access to the money? I dialed the bank in a hurry, my voice shaking as I explained the situation to the operator. Please, I need help. My son is in the hospital. I need that money, I begged. The operator responded in a calm, measured tone that felt completely at odds with the urgency I was feeling. I understand, ma'am, but due to recent suspicious activity, your account has been blocked. You'll need to visit the bank in person to resolve this issue. In person? I couldn't leave Alexander now. I couldn't let him down when he needed me most. I watched Alexander struggling to breathe, feeling utterly helpless. Hang in there, my sweet boy. Mommy's going to fix this, I whispered, brushing my hand over his pale face as tears welled up in my eyes. There was no time to waste. I demanded to speak with David. I had already made up my mind, I'd do whatever it took to unlock those funds. The moment he picked up the phone, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I need you to unblock my account now. My son is in the hospital waiting for treatment, and I can't pay because you're holding my money, I said, my voice shaking with urgency. David tried to explain, saying, we're doing this to protect you and the bank from further fraud, but I wasn't interested in his reasoning anymore. I was far beyond that. I don't care about your explanations. My son needs me, and I need that money, I insisted, my voice growing louder, catching the attention of others around me. For a moment, David didn't say anything. Then he responded cautiously, let me see what I can do. Those few minutes felt like an eternity. Finally, he spoke again, if I can temporarily lift the block, will you agree to keep this between us? His words sent a chill through me. Was I really about to make a deal that felt almost criminal? Would I have to team up with someone shady to save my own child? I'm an honest woman, David, I said, more to remind myself than to convince him. Please help me. I can't lose my son. He hesitated, then said something that made my heart race even faster. The bank's situation is complicated. The investigation is ongoing. If we don't release the funds now, we might not be able to later. To be honest, I'm not sure if we can release them at all. But I'll try, under one condition, your silence. I glanced at Alexander. His face had turned red, gasping for air, fighting for every breath. Do whatever you have to. Just do it now, I cried, my voice trembling with desperation. And with that, David agreed, leaving me in a whirlwind of hope and fear. As soon as I hung up the phone, I called out to the doctor, my voice trembling with fear. Fortunately, he was still nearby and quickly resumed Alexander's treatment. When Alexander started breathing more steadily again, I made my way to the payment counter, determined to secure his care. I was ready to pay whatever it took. I said, I'm processing this now, sliding my card through the machine and closing my eyes, praying for the best. But when I opened my eyes and saw the screen flashing an authorization message, my heart nearly stopped. What if the payment didn't go through? The machine emitted a long beep, and then finally, the screen displayed approved. I exhaled deeply, tears of relief streaming down my face, overwhelmed with a profound sense of relief. Thank you, I whispered, almost inaudibly. My heart was still racing, unsettled from the fear that had nearly consumed me moments earlier. I turned and rushed back to Alexander, who was now receiving treatment. The doctors moved swiftly, administering the necessary medication. I could see the improvement almost immediately, his breathing stabilized, and his color began to return. I held his hand, feeling the stronger, steadier beat of life in his veins. It's okay, my sweet boy. Mommy is here, I whispered, allowing myself a brief moment of peace in the storm that had been my life. But that peace was short-lived. The quiet of the hospital room was abruptly shattered by heavy footsteps and authoritative voices. I looked up to see two uniformed police officers approaching, my heart sinking. One of them held a stack of papers. Danielle Miller, one of the officers, called out, his tone firm and unyielding. Yes, that's me. What's going on? I tried to keep my voice steady, but my stomach tightened with a new wave of fear. Ms. Miller, we have an arrest warrant for you on charges of bank fraud and money laundering, the other officer declared, showing me the papers. You need to come with us immediately. Please, I pleaded, my words spilling out in a frenzied rush. My son has finally stabilized, I said, my voice trembling with desperation. I can't leave him. The first officer, his face as expressionless as a stone, replied, I understand your situation. However, you need to come with us to the station to clarify everything. Cooperation is essential. I looked at Alexander, my heart sinking. He was slowly regaining consciousness, his confusion and fear palpable. Mom, what's happening? He asked, his voice a mix of bewilderment and anxiety. It's okay, my sweet boy, I said, trying to smile through my own fear and uncertainty. I'm just going to clear up a little misunderstanding. I'll be back soon. Hiding the panic and dread bubbling inside me, I turned to the officers and, with a heavy heart, nodded in resignation. I'll go with you. Please, I added urgently, let me inform the nurse to take care of my son while I'm gone. The officers agreed, and I hurried to find the nurse. I explained the situation briefly and made sure that Alexander wouldn't be left alone. With a heavy heart, I followed the officers down the corridor. Each step felt like a mile, pulling me farther away from Alexander and toward an uncertain future. I only wanted to save my son, I thought, feeling the weight of my predicament settle deeper with every step. As I was escorted through the hospital corridors, the reality of my situation began to sink in. Each step seemed to echo with the consequences of my past decisions. I knew that the hours ahead would be crucial, determining the course of both my and Alexander's lives. When we finally reached the police station, I felt the weight of judgment and suspicion in every gaze that followed me. The journey was eerily quiet, interrupted only by the occasional crackle of police radio transmissions. Lost in my thoughts, I tried to piece together my story, searching for a way to explain my situation without further jeopardizing myself. Upon arriving at the station, I was led to an interrogation room. The space was stark, with nothing but a table and a few chairs. Soon, a detective entered the room, his presence adding another layer of gravity to the situation. His posture was rigid, but there was a flicker of empathy in his eyes. "Ms. Miller, I'm Detective Chris," he said, opening his notepad. "I'm here to better understand your situation before any judicial decisions are made. Please, start from the beginning." I took a deep breath, my mind still clouded by uncertainty, but I knew this was my chance to set things right. I began recounting everything, from the mysterious appearance of money in my bank account to the events leading up to my arrest. I explained Alexander's health crisis, the strange transactions, and my desperate attempts to save my son's life. "I know it looks suspicious," I said, my voice trembling. "But I'm just a mother trying to save her son. I should have reported this sooner, I know. But I was desperate to help him." Tears threatened to spill, and I fought to maintain my composure. Detective Chris observed me intently, jotting down every detail. "And what about the bank manager, David?" he asked. "You mentioned he was aware of the transactions." "Yes, I met with him directly and told him I would report the situation," I replied. "But he hinted that he could block my account anytime. He knew about the money and even suggested keeping quiet about it." Recalling that threat made anger surge within me. The detective nodded and continued taking notes. "This is a very serious issue," he said. "A more thorough investigation will be required. For now, you'll need to stay here until we can verify your statements. This is standard procedure and for your own safety." Despair washed over me as I realized I had no choice but to cooperate. "Please," I whispered, almost pleading. "Help me. My son needs me. He doesn't have anyone else." "I'll do everything I can, Ms. Miller," Detective Chris said, standing up and leaving the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. In the cold, isolated room at the police station, I waited, my mind consumed with thoughts of Alexander. I hoped he was safe and well cared for. The uncertainty about the future tormented me, but my determination to keep my son healthy kept me strong. "I'll get us through this, Alexander," I whispered to myself, clinging to the faint flicker of hope still burning within me. As I remained in the police station's stark interrogation room, the weight of uncertainty and fear became nearly unbearable. Each passing minute felt like an hour. I jumped at every sound in the hallway, hoping for some news about my situation or Alexander. After what felt like an eternity, Detective Chris returned. His grave expression did not bode well. "Ms. Miller, we've spoken with the bank and started verifying your claims," he said, taking a seat and placing a folder filled with documents in front of him. "However, complications have arisen." "Complications? What do you mean? Is my son okay?" "Please, tell me," I pleaded, my voice trembling with anxiety. "According to the hospital reports, your son is stable for now," Chris explained, opening the folder and showing me several documents. "However, records show that suspicious transactions were actually authorized from your home computer." "That's impossible," I insisted. "I didn't make those transactions. Someone must have broken into my house or something. I'm just a mother trying to save her son. I don't know anything about these technical procedures. All I did was search." Frustration and fear shaped my words. "I understand," Chris said. "But this complicates your situation. Further investigation is necessary. In the meantime, we must keep you in custody as a precaution. Given the suspicious money and the threats from the bank manager, it's crucial to keep you safe and isolated while we continue our investigation." He closed the folder with a dry snap, the the sound echoing the finality of his words. I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling away. Custody? But my son. I need to be with him. I can't do this. I haven't done anything wrong, I cried out in despair. Detective Chris tried to explain, I understand your situation, Ms. Miller, and I sympathize with you. However, we have procedures we must follow. Also, considering the threats you mentioned, this is for your own safety. His calm, professional demeanor was in sharp contrast to the emotional turmoil I was experiencing. They led me to a small cell within the police station, and I sat on the hard bench, trembling hands trying to grasp the reality of my situation. The isolation and the uncertainty about the future wrapped around me like a dense fog, making it hard to think or even breathe. As the night wore on, I found myself sinking deeper into my thoughts, consumed by worry for Alexander and the agony of my own helplessness. How am I supposed to protect you, Alexander? I whispered into the darkness, my words fading into the silence of the cell. The tension spiked when I heard footsteps approaching the cell in the dead of night. A guard appeared at the door with a solemn expression. Ms. Miller, Detective Chris wants to see you. There's a new development in the case, he said, unlocking the door with a metallic click. I stood up quickly, my heart racing with a mix of hope and dread about what might come next. When I entered the interrogation room, I was greeted not only by Detective Chris, but also by a man I didn't recognize. He stood confidently in a well-tailored suit, observing me with a thoughtful expression. Next to him was a leather briefcase placed on the table. Ms. Miller, this is Shane Jones. He's an attorney specializing in criminal law, and he has agreed to take on your case, Detective Chris introduced. I was taken aback by the news, a spark of hope igniting within me. Good evening, Danielle. I've read about your case and have come to help you navigate this difficult situation, Shane said, extending his hand for a firm handshake. I will ensure that you have all the support you need, he added. Mr. Jones, I replied, feeling a slight lift from the heavy burden on my shoulders. I really don't understand what happened before the money landed in my account. All I'm trying to do is take care of my son. I understand completely. I will do everything I can to clear up your situation and get you back to your son as soon as possible, Shane assured me as he sat beside me. He opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. The officer left us alone, and Shane began going through the details of the case with me. He outlined the steps we needed to take. First, we need to request a review of all the allegations against you. This is a delicate situation. We'll also contest the freeze on your account and investigate further into the fraud allegations involving the bank branch manager, Shane explained thoroughly. As we discussed, Shane took notes and asked specific questions about my interactions with the bank and the branch manager. It's crucial to record every detail. Even the smallest piece of information could play a decisive role in your defense, he said. Our conversation was interrupted when Detective Chris returned with a file containing footage from the bank's security cameras and login records. These showed suspicious activity that matched the timing of the problematic transaction. With Shane's help, I finally felt like I had an ally in my fight to protect my reputation and my son. Shane mapped out a series of actions, including preparations for a hearing scheduled for the next day. I'll make sure the truth comes to light, Danielle. You're not alone. I have a child with similar health issues, and I empathize with your case. We're capable of doing extraordinary things for our children's health and well-being, Shane said, as he prepared to leave the police station. As I was escorted back to the cell, Shane promised to take me to court the next day. The courtroom was filled with tension and anticipation. When I entered the room with Shane by my side, I could feel the weight of the gazes upon me, each one carrying unspoken judgments and quiet expectations. My heart pounded, not just from the fear of the verdict, but also from the ongoing worry for my still fragile son, Alexander. As I took my seat, I tried to steady my breathing. While waiting for the judge to take the bench, I struggled to calm my nerves. Shane gave me a reassuring glance and whispered, "We're prepared for this. Trust me." The proceedings began with the prosecution presenting their case against me. They detailed the charges of bank fraud and money laundering. They spoke of suspicious transactions, unexplained deposits into my account, and the subsequent use of those funds. Each word seemed to weigh heavier, making me sink deeper into my chair. Every accusation felt like a heavier burden than the last. Then it was Shane's turn to present the defense. He portrayed my desperate situation and the story of a mother fighting for her son's life. He explained how unexpected money had appeared and how, in the midst of my despair, I had used it to save my son without knowing its source. Danielle Miller acted out of a mother's unconditional love and had no criminal intent, Shane argued. After a lengthy deliberation, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Considering all the evidence presented and the state of the defendant's necessity, this court finds Danielle Miller not guilty of bank fraud and money laundering. However, the defendant is ordered to repay the full amount of the funds used for her son's treatment. As the judge announced the decision, the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was relieved to be declared not guilty, but the harsh reality of the new debt hit me hard. How was I going to repay such a staggering amount? I barely knew how to handle the bills from Alexander's hospital stay, let alone repay this new debt. Shane approached and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "We'll find a solution, Danielle. Trust me," he said gently. As I walked out of the courtroom, I was freed from criminal charges but burdened with a new heavy weight. The enormous debt that I had no idea how to resolve. With each step, reality drew me back into the everyday struggles of life. I'm free now, but how will I pay for Alexander's treatment? How will I manage this new debt? I thought with a heavy heart. I can't afford to fail now, not when Alexander still needs me so much. Arriving at the hospital, I felt a wave of relief wash over me when I saw that my son's condition had improved. I offered him a gentle smile. He was blissfully unaware of the financial strain pressing down on us. Seeing him so innocent and serene fueled my determination to overcome this new obstacle. For you, Alexander. For us, I will find a way, I promised myself. Even though I had no clear idea of how I would fulfill that promise. Then, unexpectedly, the phone rang, pulling me from my dark thoughts. I hesitated before answering, still carrying the weight of recent struggles. On the other end of the line was a voice I thought I'd never hear again. It was Mr. William, the same boss who had insulted and fired me months ago. "Danielle, it's me. William. I need to talk to you," he started, his voice uncharacteristically trembling. "I've been thinking about you. About how I treated you." I tightened my grip on the phone, a mix of surprise and caution swirling within me. "I didn't truly understand what your son was going through or the gravity of your situation. I misjudged your actions. I thought you were just distracted. I was wrong. Deeply wrong," he continued, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I've read about your case, the trial, everything you've been through. I can't even begin to imagine how tough it's been for you." The sincerity in William's voice was palpable, and I was taken aback. It seemed that my former tormentor was genuinely remorseful. "Danielle, I'm calling to apologize," William's voice crackled over the phone. "And to make amends. If you're willing to forgive me, I'd like to offer your job back. If you're interested in coming back. And beyond that, the company will cover all your son's medical expenses and your legal fees. I see this as the very least we can do to start repairing the damage we've caused," he said. I was momentarily silent, my mind whirling with conflicting emotions. The offer was beyond what I had hoped for. Not only did it promise financial stability, but it also presented an opportunity for a fresh start. It was a chance to break free from the burdens that had tormented me. I appreciate it, Mr. William. This means a lot to me. I accept, I finally replied. My voice trembled with a mixture of relief and renewed hope. Thank you, Danielle. And I apologize once more. I hope you can move past this and find a way forward, William said. There was sincerity in his words that I had never heard from him before. As I hung up, I sat back, letting the reality of William's words settle in. I was now free from the legal accusations and had secured the support needed for Alexander's well-being. More than that, I had been given something rarely afforded in life. A second chance. Not just in terms of employment, but also an opportunity for reconciliation and forgiveness. Eventually, it was discovered by the judge that David, the bank branch manager, had embezzled money from the bank. He had deposited it into customer accounts and then gradually siphoned all the funds into his own account. He had done this to make it look like the customers were responsible for the crimes. I learned that I had been one of those customers who, like many others, had received a large sum in my bank account. Following the judge's discovery, he was arrested, and his crimes of fraud, theft, and attempted embezzlement were fully proven. When the case was resolved, I finally felt a sense of relief, but rebuilding my life was the next challenge. Returning to the place where I had endured the greatest humiliation would not be easy. But I knew people could surprise you. Just as William had shown me a side I never expected to see. Perhaps even in the most unlikely places, there is room for more understanding, more humanity. I thought sometimes the deepest pain can lead to surprising moments of redemption. A faint smile touched my lips as I looked at Alexander. At first, going back to my old job was incredibly difficult. The corridors and rooms still echoed with past memories, and I felt the curious, sometimes critical gazes of old colleagues. Yet, William's constant and genuinely remorseful presence, his personal efforts to support me, began to soften the sharp edges of the past. Months passed, and forgiveness proved to be a transformative force. For both William and me. His honesty about his mistakes and his visible efforts to make amends helped heal old wounds. Gradually, an unexpected friendship began to blossom between us, founded on mutual respect. I had to admit to myself that, even with the good reason of saving my son, using money in that way had been a mistake. It was a deviation from integrity. Understanding that made room in my heart to accept forgiveness, both from William and from myself. Everyone makes mistakes, including me. Since then, I vowed to remain the honest woman I was before the money appeared, despite my worries for my son's health. My dedication and integrity did not go unnoticed, and not long after my return, I was promoted to the manager of the cleaning department. This new position not only recognized my professional skills but also gave me a new role in helping other employees. I worked to ensure no one else would face the humiliation I had, striving to be the best manager for my team. Personally, the greatest gift I received was Alexander's full recovery. It was my greatest joy. The medical treatments that the company fully covered, as part of William's apology, had been successful. Alexander emerged from his long battle with health not only healed but stronger and more resilient. My gratitude to the doctors and to everyone who supported us during those difficult times was immeasurable, and I made every effort to express it. Now standing on the brink of a new phase in life, Alexander was preparing to enter college. With a sharp mind and a thirst for knowledge further fueled by his days in the hospital, he was eager to study biology. I watched with an almost incredulous pride as the once small and frail child embarked on this grand journey. The neighbors who had criticized me apologized. They hadn't known everything I had been through. And it brought a new sense of camaraderie and mutual support among us. It became a model for helping each other, just as I had helped others and improved myself. Reflecting on all I had overcome, the struggles, fears, and uncertainties, I felt a deep peace. Adversity had shaped a new, unexpectedly promising life filled with hope and new opportunities. Alexander and I, bound by our trials, looked to the future with optimism and courage. Sometimes life knocks us down, but we're still here, stronger, wiser, and together, I thought. I smiled at Alexander, and he returned the smile with the same radiant warmth. Life had been a tough teacher, but an effective one. We were ready for whatever challenges might come next. As we always had, we would face them together.
If you enjoyed this story, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support is what motivates us to continue bringing you touching stories almost every day. Don't miss the next incredible tale that's coming up on your screen. We truly appreciate you being here with us. You can now click on the link displayed on the screen. We have a selection of valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment specially chosen just for you. See you there.